we're not all 10 out of 10 in all those categories. So it's very important for us each to understand which one of those we're good at or can become good at.
This is the Yield Coach Show, episode 51. Hey everybody, this is your coach Ian Brown. A few announcements. Yield Coach Capital has opened its doors to investors looking to multiply their money while working with yours truly and our varsity investment team. We recently closed our 170-acre Gainesville, Florida industrial tract, and our limited partner investors are on pace to make 2.5 times or more on their money. That opportunity is gone, but don't miss the next one. Be sure to join our investor list and never miss a deal again. You can join our investor list by the portal, which is in the show notes of this podcast. It's in our Instagram bio link, and you can also do it at yield-coach.com. If you join our investor list, we will get you the free gift, 107 questions to ask a deal sponsor, and a discount to our Employee to Entrepreneur video course, which is packed full of information and case studies to kickstart your investment success. Now is your time to take the field. I'm your host, Ian Brown. Every episode, we bring you dynamic entrepreneurs, real estate investors, thought leaders, and inspirational guests ready to open up, share their story, the good, the bad, the ugly, so you can learn lessons, gain advantages, and accelerate your own success. Very exciting guest today. We have Mr. Paul Thompson. Paul Thompson is a real estate investment thought leader, host of his own podcast. He runs the Next Level Mastermind. He has been a guest on the Bigger Pockets podcast, and ding, ding, ding. He has successfully transitioned from working that 9 to 5 to a full-time real estate investor and thought leader. Paul, welcome to the show.
Ian, thanks for having me. Looking forward to this.
Definitely. You are right up my alley. I think we're going to have a lot of overlap. Obviously, we don't already know each other. I'm looking forward to this. I won't hog all the limelight in the beginning, but it's been a fun ride for me. 17 years in real estate, and about the last 8, got myself out of the grind. It wasn't overnight, but that law of the first deal, and one thing leads to another. And I've been fortunate to not have a traditional job for a handful of years now. So I get to interview guys like you, and we get to have some fun. But tell me about yourself, Paul.
Yeah, so I think similar stories. I was in corporate America for a long time. I classically trained as an engineer, got an engineering degree, and got a job. I followed the traditional advice that my parents gave me, well-intended advice that helped me kind of grow out of a certain socioeconomic class that I was raised in. But I found myself in this career wondering, why in the world am I going to work for 40 hours plus a week? And I felt very unrewarded by the whole thing, but I didn't really know what the alternative was. I didn't have some great business idea. I wasn't a natural entrepreneur. And so I just kind of settled into life and, started working and got married and got a mortgage, had kids. And it wasn't an all bad life, but it wasn't fulfilling either. And the more I climbed the corporate ladder, the more I realized that I'd had my ladder against the wrong wall all along. And I wasn't operating within my zone of genius, and I wasn't working to fulfill my own dreams. I was working, exchanging my time for money to fulfill somebody else's dreams. And I had just kind of this wake-up call moment when I was on a beach vacation in 2015. So at this point, 8 years ago, and I wanted to extend that vacation. And I called my boss up and said, I've been gone for a week. I'll still work, but I'm just going to stay at the beach. My kids are going to play on the beach. My wife will watch them, and I'll be in at the beach house just, working remotely. And I worked for an internet service provider. So we made the technology that made this possible. This should not be a stretch for them. And it's we don't do that here. Get your ass back to the office. I expect you to see you here Monday at 8. It's okay, fine. And it wasn't even a conversation well, what's going on? How can we make this work? It was, no, get your ass back here. And I was okay, what else was there to do but to just kind of tuck my tail between my legs and go back to work the next week. But that drive home that weekend was I was white knuckling all the way home. It's I was so pissed. I was okay, I see where I stand. I'm not that important to you, clearly. So I'm just going to go ahead and figure out something else to do.
And you that's kind of like your last straw moment, if you will, where it's like,
It
okay,
was.
pop, yeah, and you're talking about white knuckling at home and being angry. There's something about being away from work and having clarity. You were at the beach. I
Yeah.
think I was mowing I haven't really thought about this. I think I was mowing my backyard, and I live in Florida.
Yeah.
We all dress like this, right? And so I live in Florida. I'm
Right. Right.
sweating. I'm probably mowing my backyard like in board shorts and no shirt and flip flops, and I'm just like moments of clarity because you're like just occupied enough. You're not in work, and you can think. I'm like, I'm going to start blazing my own path. So I was doing more deal making as a broker, and attorney, and appraiser. I keep all those licenses,
Hmm.
but I was like, you know what? I'm going to start, to say it very plainly, on the top of that contract where it says buyer, it's going to start being me or my LLC. And I'm going to start writing I didn't do a lot of wholesaling, but I was like, I'm going to write some assignable contracts in case I get, up a creek. And I'm going to start
Yep.
moving like a principal and pretty much like my clients. I was making my clients a lot of money. I was like, I'm going to start acting more like them and move. I'm using plain English, but I'm going to move from being a service
Mm.
provider to like a principal primary mover, active investor. So, but back to you, you're
Yep.
white nut, you're white knuckling, you're pissed, you're driving home from the family beach vacation,
Yep.
and I'm sure at this moment you weren't quite sure what stones to step on, so to speak, to get across that water.
Right.
What was the
Yeah. I had to
first
build a
one? Yeah,
bridge.
when you had to build that
Yeah.
bridge.
Hmm. I had to build a bridge from exchanging my time for money to becoming an investor and a business owner. And I went on this kind of deep search for something I could do that would allow me to earn an income on the side that would ultimately take place of my day job. And I considered buying a franchise. I considered starting an insurance agency. I mean, I looked at a lot of different, I looked at like doing ice machines or ATMs. So like, well, whatever I can get a hold of, I want to get involved. And the more I looked into it, the more I realized that all those decisions would have been buying myself another job. I really didn't want to do that. I wanted to be able to buy my time back. And it just dawned on me like, oh, well, maybe I'll just try real estate. I'll just buy a rental property and just see if it works. And when I got that first rental check in, I was like, this is what they're talking about when they say you can't retire until you make money while you sleep. It's like I need to stop exchanging my time for money. I need my money to go work for me. And so I kind of got hooked and I started doing the Burr method, and I bought something like 18 houses in the first 18 months.
Wow.
And I was on a tear to replace my income. And the more I got into it, the more I realized that I needed to control the deals myself versus buying them from wholesalers or even from agents. I wanted to direct to seller. And so I started getting into wholesaling. I started getting into flipping houses. And I have since had the scales removed from my eyes once again. And I don't really mess with single family anymore. I'm really more in the commercial space now. Um, Single family has its place. I still have a portfolio that I live off of. So I'm not down on a single family. It just doesn't scale.
Mm-hmm. So I think that single family, and I'm similar to you in the fact that the first deal that I did, instead of partnering, I wanted to do one alone for a variety of reasons.
Yeah.
I wanted total control of the process. I wasn't, I didn't want to have a disagreement on the very first deal and not be able to execute the way that I wanted to. So
Yep.
I did like a little, it wasn't literally purple, but technically it might have been like a burgundy. I did this little burgundy, crack house, and it was like on the fringe of the neighborhood that I live in. It's a zip code anyways, not quite the neighborhood.
Mm-hmm.
And and I bought it for land value, and it had a barn, and it's not agriculture, it just literally had a barn for no reason. And there's this house, it's zoned commercial, and it's always been a house. So in most parts of America, you can always do the legal use it was intended for when it was built. So I knew I could sell it to somebody residentially,
Sure.
and I knew if I had to, because I'm a commercial
Yep.
broker, I knew I could put a plumber, electrician, whatever. It had a little bit of excess land. And it had this barn, so somebody could park their vehicles and do their trades. And I'm like, okay, we'll see. I had the classic 12-month interest only hard money loan, just clicking along,
Mm.
and I had like no money. I've talked about this on another episode, but I had no money, and I did a Home Depot, a Lowe's, a lumber liquidator. Might have found one other vendor with a credit line, but I got every credit line that was available from like every vendor for the flip.
Mm-hmm.
And so
Mm-hmm.
I had the hard money clicking along. And as you're aware, and a lot of people listening are aware, there's no payments with the carry of the hard money. It all accrues to the payoff. So I have this balloon loan just kind of growing month by month. I've got this Lumber Liquidators, Home Depot, and Lowe's credit, clicking along. And what you don't know, you don't know. But I'm so glad I did that deal alone. I didn't know that it was on, I should know. I didn't know it was on septic. It's in the middle of the city. Like everybody's on city water and sewer. This old 1915 property was on septic. And so, and no one could even find that. They had to like dig around to even find where the tank was. So here I am like replacing septic. There's not even any septic vendors in very few septic vendors in Jacksonville to even go do it. I thought the foundation it wasn't going to pass the old marble test. I mean, the floors ran a little bit, but it was beyond that. It needed to be leveled. And then when we leveled it, when I say level, brought up to a level, not taken down, not raised. And then we got it mostly level. And then, as you know, what happens in these old houses, all that plaster, a lot of it starts to crack or little hairline cracks. So now you got this cosmetic work. But I could go on and on about that deal, but I'm so glad I did it. I found a buyer. We did about a $55,000 profit at the end of the day and 1031 into an 8-unit apartment. Then I got to learn Section 8 and HUD and working with the housing authority in my city. Went from the 8 to the 28 to an 83 into commercial, and the rest is history. But had I never started with that little purple drug house, I would have had nothing to 1031 into the 8-unit, and I probably wouldn't have been confident, at least at that stage in my life. I wouldn't have been confident in just grabbing a relative or a friend to go straight into the 8-unit Section 8 because I knew I had to learn that too. I just didn't really want to learn on somebody. I don't mind learning on somebody else's dime within reason, but when it's like an entrepreneurial pursuit with some risk, I want to make sure it's all on me in the beginning. So that's kind of how I kick things off. But going back to what you said, starting with single family and the problem being scalability. So maybe do you mind speaking to just the challenges of trying to scale within single family?
Yeah, so it kind of depends on what your goals are. So in my case, I was wanting to replace my income, and I was a professional engineer, so I had, reasonable income. I was making like 150 grand a year or something. So I was making a comfortable lifestyle, or making a comfortable living, and had a comfortable lifestyle, and I wanted to at least be able to replace that. So you need a lot of rental properties to replace $100,000 salary, especially when you're using debt. So I ran all these calculations as I tend to do because I'm an engineer. I figured out that at one point I needed 102 units in order to successfully replace my income. And then I just got smarter and started buying deals even deeper so that I was making more cash flow per unit. That was part of it. And then if you're just trying to retire in 10 or 15 years and you want to make a few good investments, somewhere like 10 rental properties is probably fine for a lot of people that continue to work. But if you want out of your W-2 and you want to, escape the rat race and have something that's paying you while you're globetrotting or whatever, you're going to need a lot more than 10 properties, more than likely, unless you're starting off with a lot of cash. And I wasn't. I had a limited amount of cash. I couldn't buy all those things free and clear. I was using loans. And so the cash flow was like $100, $200 per month, and that doesn't change your life unless you have a whole bunch of those. And so I realized that I needed to think of my single families as like my long-term 401k money, but then create a business that sloughed off cash that I could live off comfortably, that I could work harder and make more cash. It's heavily taxed, but it's still income that I can live off of. Very similar to what I was doing as an engineer. And that was for a while for me was wholesaling and flipping. But it turns out I actually don't like those businesses. I mean, it's exhausting. Some people love it. It's that I wasn't made for it. So you need to find the thing that you really enjoy. And I have found that lending is the business that I enjoy. So I like raising capital, and I like basically hypothecating that money into being a lender to other investors. And so that's what I do now.
Awesome. Well, you mentioned something I took a note down, and I don't know if I was going to say it again, but the zone of genius you mentioned in the beginning there, and you were like, operating in your zone of genius. So in that same vein, like what drew you to the lending side? I was going to say, what didn't you like about, I guess I could ask you, what didn't you like about the wholesaling and the fixing? I think I know the answer, but, what took you out of wholesaling and into this direction of private or lending, however you did it?
Yeah. So what's interesting about the wholesale business is it's a relatively new business model. It's only been around at any kind of scale for like probably 20 years on the high end. And it's kind of operating in the margins of legality. Um, if you're only ever tying up contracts and only ever assigning them and don't have the capacity to buy those properties, I would not want to stand in front of a real estate commission with that story. And in some states, just make it flat out illegal. So real estate commissions don't like it, for one. Two, it's becoming very, very competitive. And three, you need to be a sales machine to make it happen. And I am not a classic salesperson. I don't really like sales. I mean, I think sales is important. It's a good thing to learn, but I'm not the classic outside sales personality. I don't like building sales teams. Super important to have in a business, but I'm not that guy. I'm the finance guy. I'm the guy that likes to move money around. I'm the guy that likes to analyze, make a decision, and then somebody goes and executes the decision. I'm a visionary, not an operator. So when you learn these things about yourself, you think, okay, well, where can I do something where I'm operating in a zone where I am classically made for it? And wholesaling and flipping just wasn't it for me. There's still ways to make money doing it, but it's just not what I enjoy. But I do enjoy the thrill of the hunt for deals, which is funny to say that because I like analyzing a deal and seeing that, oh, there's a ton of equity here. I like seeing the value, find the value. And then but I like people to bring those deals to me and then for me to underwrite them real quickly and say, okay, this feels like this passes the sniff test. Here's the team that's going to go actually do the real deep research and come back with a report saying, yes, this is one we should lend on, or this is one we should not lend on.
Now and that makes sense with especially with your engineering background. And, it's funny because going back to this zone of genius or superpower, kind of the different terms you hear thrown around. So I started I'm still a certified general appraiser in the state of Florida, but I don't write reports anymore. I did like hundreds of hotels and golf courses and apartments and everything, because you do bank work. So you have to pretty much do whatever the bank needs, which is nearly every commercial asset class. I did concentrate in hotels because we just had that niche. Anyways, so I'm doing all these very, very, in my opinion, complicated Excel discounted cash flow spreadsheets and penetration rates off of star reports and managers reports and breaking down P&Ls and running forward-looking P&Ls and comparing them against other properties and deriving cap rates. And I'm like, this is great, but I was in my 20s doing that, and it was so dense that it took me every bit of 2 years to get comfortable. And then the third year, I felt like I wouldn't call it mastery, but like comfort. I was like, okay, this is my job. I understand it. My boss didn't have to do much review of my work by year 3. Although if he's listening, he'd probably laugh. But what I'm getting at is like, now my life is so different. But I wouldn't trade it for the world. It's like I have this like very analytical background that I don't think that I wasn't duped. I wasn't hoodwinked. I went into it eyes wide open, but they were open, but I didn't know what I was doing. And so I went into it eyes wide open and like all eager. But if I knew I was going to be in the land of like spreadsheets and interviewing owners and trying to pull comps, and a comp for freaking everything, comp for the income, a comp for the expense, a comp for this type of income, a comp for this type of expense, sales comps, rent comps, land comps, new construction comps, comp, lending matrix sheets and all. And so it's like, I'm forever grateful. And I don't think I'd be able to have hit my trajectory I know I wouldn't be able to hit my trajectory that I've been able to do without that background. But to your point, getting into like your zone of genius or your superpower, now you've applied like your engineering mind in training into the world of real estate. For me, I don't mind. Actually, I actually enjoy, for the most part, meeting new people and talking to strangers. Drives my wife crazy. So I don't move super quick. I literally don't move quickly. Like, it sounds weird to say because people are just listening, but like I physically walk slow. I ponder things. I talk to strangers. I'm constantly thinking. I pull hardcore visionary over integrator. And but I started in this field that's only rewarding me for like grinding through spreadsheets and deriving value. Yeah. And so what's funny is we've like, I don't want to say we've gone like this, you know what I mean? But like here you are, start doing like this like sales machine. And you're right, wholesaling and fix and flip is like a sales machine's man or universe.
Yep.
You're like, that's
Yep.
not me. And here I am starting over here, like in the art of the grindy underwriting, very dense commercial lending
Mm-hmm.
underwriting. And we kind of just like switched over. And here I am, like talking to strangers. A lot of my underwriting is going to be like back of napkin. And don't get me wrong, I still jump into my spreadsheets, but a lot of my underwriting is going to be like back of napkin, meeting people, finding like weird motivations, funny situations, zoning and rezoning opportunities and things like that, where very, very nuanced stuff. And it's like, I did not start there, but I kind of feel like now I'm operating in my zone of genius, and it sounds like you're operating in your zone of genius. But let's go back to you with this, I did a little bit of seller financing of my own deals. So I've obviously taken seller financing, but I just gave seller financing on a deal that ballooned and paid off. I kid you not, 2 days before this recording. So it feels good to lend it out and get it back. So I think that's a good segue into like getting into private lending and kind of how you're enjoying that and scaling that.
Yeah. So when I started learning about real estate and buying my own rental properties, I went to a lot of these weekend seminars that are put on by these like grand old men of real estate that did not have a back of the room sales pitch. That's fine. There are values in big time masterminds, but that was just not was their angle. They were just they've been around forever. They still are. They have these conferences on the weekend, and I would fly to Atlanta or Tampa or wherever they were having these events. And for about the first 2 years, I was going to something like 6 or 10 of those a year. And I feel like I got a master's class in high level real estate by going to those things. And so doing really creative financing and how to use your IRAs cleverly were just something that became very natural to me. So I started using, and when I would go to these weekend conferences, I would pick up 2 or 3 nuggets. I would go back to my own portfolio, my own life, and I would do little experiments. And so I would take my IRA, convert it over to a self-directed IRA, and then issue and become a private lender. And I was doing that for a while and really enjoyed it because the amount of effort is quite low because I was lending in my backyard where I already understood the market, and I was lending to people that I'd gotten to know in my local area. And so the risk level to me was quite low and easy amount of work for me to just evaluate a deal real quickly. Would I buy this deal? Yes or no? If I would, then would I buy it at this price? Absolutely. Okay, I'll lend on it, 75% loan to value or something. And I would just help be the hard money effectively for people doing the Burr method or people that were doing doing flips. And so as that scaled and I started doing loans, I ran out of my own cash. Like my solo 401k and my IRA only had so much cash in there. So I thought, well, how can I do this like better? Like how can I do more of this? And so I started a little company with a few of my friends that we all piled some money in, and we were all members of the company, and I was the manager. They hired me as the manager, and then I would just run the business of lending out of it. And that was my proof of concept. We did that for about 2 years, and we made like 15 to 18% return on our money. And I thought, okay, this works. Like I can do this. I need to grow up and do this at the proper scale. And so that's when I started researching how to run a fund, how to create a fund. And there's a lot more to that than I realized. And had I known just how hard it was, I probably would have started earlier so I could have slow rolled it more. But now that I've launched it and I've filed all the appropriate documents, I have a fund where I raise capital from passive investors that have lazy money that are looking for a double-digit return, and then I and my team now issue loans to land flippers is our specialty.
Land flippers. And why? Well, two things. Let me back up. Self-directing IRAs. Now, when you were lending out of your IRA, did you? And I truly am not positive, so it's not a baited question. You have to put it with somebody that you have like a firewall between, right? So it comes out of you and goes to someone else,
Yeah.
right? So can you parse that out a little bit for me?
Yeah. So what he's talking about here is when you have an IRA and you decide to self-direct it, you have to put it into a a custodian that specializes in self-directed, meaning that they don't offer any investments. They just make it so that you can invest in whatever the IRS allows you to invest in, which is nearly everything, but you can't self-deal. So you don't want to create a prohibited transaction or work with a prohibited person that you get some sort of indirect benefit from. So you have to maintain this arm's length transaction. So I could do a deal, Paul and Ian can do a deal, but Paul and Paul's wife can't do a deal together because my wife is considered a prohibited party in my IRA. And so, like, if I'm lending to Ian, he's doing a flip in Jacksonville, that's fine because we're not business partners, we're not related. We just are friends. We're business. We like to do business together. We're financial friends, as people call it. And I can lend money out of my IRA to Ian's account, and then only benefit that Paul gets and Paul's IRA gets is the return of the capital and the interest I've earned.
Perfect. That's a very good explanation. So as long as and the custodian's not going to have say over what you do, it's just a matter of kind of having that firewall, right? Yeah.
Correct.
Okay.
Now they
Correct.
do their best to make sure you're not doing anything stupid, but they're not on the hook. You are on the hook. If you trip and fall, they're not there to catch you. They'll try and prevent you from tripping. So if you do get audited by the IRS and they find that you created some sort of prohibited transaction inside of your IRA, it can be pretty costly to your IRA. So a lot of people, when they look into this, they start trying to get really clever and creative about how to lend to themselves. It's like, it's so easy to do it right. Just follow the rules. Don't try and get clever with this. Like go lend to somebody who's not disqualified. It's easy.
Yeah. So now this is your primary, this is the fund you have now that you're growing. And am I correct to say it's with a lending focus? You're not taking title to property.
Yes.
You're taking. Okay.
Correct.
Gotcha. And
yeah, and,
what
and
would
it's
be,
make sure I disclose real quickly. It is a 506c, meaning I can publicly talk about it. So it's available for accredited investors, and we focus on issuing loans. So capital investors put their cash with our fund, and then as a fund, we issue loans to borrowers who are flipping land.
All right. And that was actually where I was going to go earlier. So the decision to go with land flippers. Tell us how you came to that conclusion, because I think that's a little bit unique. I know because I've bought
niche.
It is, and it's also an area where liquidity can be difficult. So I can kind of see some opportunity where there's challenge in lending, but I don't want to take words out of your mouth. What kind of took you to the land flipper?
Well, you can see the opportunity already. I can tell because you're in the business. So couple of reasons. There's a lot of hard money lenders out there, and it's like, how do you compete, and how do you like carve out a good competitive edge in the hard money lending space for single family flips? That's one. I was concerned about that. Two, I did not want to lend outside of my area that I know a lot about for hard money unless I was doing an asset class that is very easy to understand from a distance. Single family can really turn quickly. You're an appraiser, you know this. I mean, you spend a lot of time figuring out the comps and the values of a property. They can change quickly. And if you don't know the area, you can mean well and do your due diligence and still get duped by accident very, very easily with single family. So I didn't want to do that, but land is actually much easier to evaluate because there's a lot less moving parts on it. And then we also specialize in like repeat borrowers. So we're kind of a niche fund. We don't have, $100 million to lend, right? We have a few $1 million to work with, and we're doing small transactions of $100,000 or less. And so we're spreading out risk by quite a bit by going with these little small short-term loans. Also, we just launched this year. I've done this for 3 years, but my fund technically launched in 2023. And in this current market cycle, I'm not looking to get into long-term loans because the market and the interest rates are too volatile for me. So I like the short-term loan opportunity where somebody's going to be in and out of a transaction in 6 months or less, oftentimes 3 months or less. And we only go up 50% loan to value. So we're super conservative on our underwriting. We'll fund 100% of your deal, but they got to get an amazing deal where it's worth 100,000. We'll end up to 50, but they need to buy it for 50 or less if we're going to fully fund it.
That makes sense. So what are your, like in this, it's not really a buy box, it's a lending box, but
Yeah.
location. If you tell us about like location, you did already mention the 3 to 6 months being ideal. And I know it probably varies,
Yep.
but it sounds like with your repeats, maybe just I usually do like a deal deep dive later in the episode, but I think now is not a bad time to maybe
Sure.
walk us through like
Let's
like
do
in
it.
the box, fits the criteria, checks the boxes kind of loan for you.
So the kind of loan or the buy box, lending box that we have is the loan size is $100,000 or less. We will lend up to 50% of the value of the property, and we will do land loans from really almost every state. We there's a couple of states we avoid, New York being a specific one because the foreclosure process there is just so onerous, and so most of the Northeast is something that we really got to be convinced to talk to be involved in. And then we just do a loan that has a balloon payment of at 6 months, and the interest accrues. And then we there's some fundamental check boxes, like it has to have access, it has to be marketable, we have to have comps that show its value. We like to use repeat borrowers. We don't do first time land flippers. Like we just are not interested in being your experiment. Um, because most people who are flipping land, they do it with their own cash first because these aren't big transactions. And so usually they do, 5, 10 of these things first, and then they run out of cash, but they've proven their model and they've seen, a full cycle transactions several times over. And then they come to us because we're expensive compared to most options, but we're easy to work with. And we're, like once we decide we're going to fund it, like we're going to fund it and we can close quickly, which is often necessary with land because they have found somebody who's willing to sell this thing at a song, and they want to close as quick as they can.
I might have to be. I mean, I know you still need to underwrite me. It's okay, but I could see myself trying to work my way onto your approved list there. Yeah, because you're right about some of
Yeah.
these smaller land deals. Well, I'm gonna give you super short 3 minute on that one I was mentioning earlier. So I bought land from a
Sure.
wholesaler almost exactly 2 years
Yep.
ago, and bought it for $120,000. It's an acre and a half. To your point, like I know slightly over what you're talking about, but barely. 120,000
Yep.
acre and a half,
Close. Yep.
and it had this RM had medium. I'm gonna say it plainly. It had medium density zoning, but it only had a
Mm-hmm.
couple of dwellings on it. So it had a couple dwellings, four actually, but four scattered dwellings. One was a mobile home, an acre and a half. So excess land for sure.
Mm-hmm.
And the zoning allowed, it's actually been increased just by statute, not by any rezone, to what would now be 48 units you could put on here. Of course, you'd have to go multi-story and it'd be an
Mm-hmm.
engineered product. However, Jacksonville has a hot multifamily market, and you got 48 units on this thing. People were paying, 5, 7, 10,000 per unit per land, depending on the condition of land. In some areas, much higher, but like this is run of the mill Jacksonville West Side. Anyway, so I bought it for
Mm-hmm.
120, and I did buy it with my own cash, and
Mm-hmm.
I mowed the yard, trashed it out, put it back on the market, and I was like, okay, who's going to be able to take this thing down and not cringe at the fact that I just paid 120. I'm in the market like 6 weeks later with like a haircut to the lawn and a trash out, and I went to the market at
Yep.
270. And
Yep.
and again, these aren't like huge numbers, but the percent change is big, so it catches people's attention. Oh, you just bought this thing for 120. You're in the market at 270.
Mm-hmm.
Anyway, so but what I did is, just as a seller, obviously you're not doing it as a seller, but you're probably. I was like, you know what? I'm going to offer some legitimate leverage on this thing. So I made them put 60,000 down, which is me getting half my money back. And they went ahead and reached up to the 270.
Yep.
And I did interest only just for a couple years. Literally 24 months. And he just paid me off 2 days before recording this episode. And he never missed a payment. We were on auto. I knew 60 was enough to keep the guy honest. And I knew if I had to take it back, 60 was enough to have in it to go back and do it again. And I knew he
Mm-hmm.
was going to deploy. I knew he had a CapEx renovation schedule. He was just ready to launch the minute he closed. And
Yep.
my point is, and it was the easiest, and I'm not bragging, it's just an observation. It was the easiest deal I think I've done so far. Not the biggest by any stretch, but it's one of the easiest little deals I've done. 25,000 in loan payments over 2 years. Here come, $1,100 comes rolling in, interest only every month, and then it balloons, and he pays me off. And I was like, wow. It was my first. It's funny that I have you on the show today because I'm very familiar with lending and real estate, but it was my first little taste of like, holy
Yep.
cow, like and I know it was seller financing, but it's very similar to what you're talking about. being the lender it can be sweet when you do it right. It was one of the easiest deals I've done. And so I can just see
money,
how, like, yeah, you like that.
the money's in the money. Go to any major city, anytime you go to a small city, even, what's the biggest or nicest building in that city? It's the banks. And why do you think that is? Because like they're making money on top of money on top of money. And it is, if you go into real estate, you're going to start kind of going up this ladder of sophistication. And the very top of the ladder is being the bank, because you're not having to deal with really the asset itself. There's a lot of value in the asset, and there's a reason why banks like real estate, because it's an inherent fixed real property value that they can use as like natural collateral, and they can't run off with it. So it's a really good lending source for banks. But why aren't the banks out there flipping properties? It's because that's where all the risk is. Like the real money is in hypothecating money, which is bringing in investors' cash at, I don't know, in my case, 10, 11, 12%, and then making 18% on it. In the bank's case, they're bringing money in at 3% and making 6 or 8% on it, right? So, and probably sometimes higher. So that's a really important lesson for everybody listening to here is you find where your niche is, find where your thing is, and find a way to climb up that ladder as much as possible, even if it's just in your IRA. So you might be doing your active business, whether you're an appraiser, an agent, a wholesaler, a commercial apartment guy, which I do as well. But then you have other buckets of money that you can be doing this same strategy. And you can be the bank outside of or inside of your IRA, inside of your solo 401k.
This is great. You're talking about something that I think a lot of people need to hear, because many people that listen to shows like this or Bigger Pockets, educational investment, entrepreneurial shows, sometimes it feels like the only path is to go. I mean, let's be honest. I think everybody's first notion is like, I'm going to go flip a house, and you're like, well,
Yeah.
sure. Like I did it. You've flipped houses, but it's, it's not going to get you to financial freedom anytime soon. And if everyone talks about like you score that touchdown on, let's say hypothetically your flip is a success, which is not guaranteed. You scored that touchdown. Well, depending on how you structure yourself, you have a high tax bill coming because you haven't held it for a long-term gain. You may not be a qualified real estate professional, and you can't 1031 it because you haven't had it a year. And you're like, man, like I got to do this a lot. And if I don't do it a lot, I'm going to lose my vendors. I'm not going to be top of mind. I'm not going to be top of mind with wholesalers, brokers. Oh, now I got to be direct to seller. I got to talk to strangers and irritate the community. And I mean, I'm with you. I do like direct to seller real estate work, but I would never want to be the guy that just like blankets a neighborhood with like, like postcards and like the SMS texting, the cold texting, which who knows, that might get clobbered by the FCC or something, or maybe it already is. But because you and I, we both own properties. I get so many weird cold texts on properties. I'm like, who would do this? I'm like, I am never going to respond to any of these texts, and I mean, somebody must, or they wouldn't be doing them, but it's just like, it's just absurd. And so I think that you've kind of become like the hive, and here come the bees, or whatever analogy you want, like a moth to the flame, whatever analogy you want to use. But you mentioned, 20 minutes ago in the interview, like you don't like, I'm using my own words, this high paced sales machine stuff where it's like flip the script and now the funnel's coming to you, and everybody needs the money and you're putting together your fund to do it. So I got a lot of I got a lot of respect for that model.
There's a lot to be said for this notion, real quickly, if you don't mind, of understanding what you bring to the table. It's kind of like the 5 pillars of real estate. And so we have time, we have money, we have network, we have knowledge, and we have capital. Or we have, I think I missed one. We have knowledge, and these 5 things that we have access, deal flow is what I'm missing. So we have access to deals, we have access to time, money, capital, knowledge. So we're not all 10 out of 10 in all those categories. So it's very important for us each to understand which one of those we're good at or can become good at. And you're not going to become 10 out of 10 at all of those, especially if you go into commercial real estate where the transaction sizes are very large. You're probably not going to be a lone wolf out there in these big transactions. So you want to find people that you're going to partner with, or you're going to have some sort of a JV type structure where you're doing deals together, and you might be the money person. You might be the person who has the time to go out and find the deal. You might be someone who knows how to structure these deals. And I've just found that I like to be the guy that structures the deal and puts the money together. And so somebody else spends their time to go find a deal, and I want to find really good sponsors that have proven time and performance. And I bring the capital and I bring the deal structures to the table. And all of us can be thinking about that. And our unique answer to that kind of pillars of that I just talked about is unique to your skill set and your zone of genius.
And I know I think you already hit on it, but you are, correct me if I'm wrong, you are lending on commercial land, or do you have certain zonings you don't lend on? Are you doing residential and commercial?
Yeah. If it has to be commercial, like if it's somebody's personal residence, meaning that if I'm not dealing with the general public with my loans, everything I'm doing is commercial. So I don't care about the zoning so much. It tends to be ag, but I don't really care about the zoning so much, so long as it's nobody's primary residence. Like I like, just from a legality point of view, I don't want to get involved in that business at all. That's a whole different problem to solve that I don't care to do.
I agree. You don't want to be trying to, like in Florida where I am, you don't want to be trying to wrestle away somebody's homestead. We're a judicial foreclosure state, and that is not really where you want to be when you're in the business of high interest rate, reposition loans for 3 to 6 months. On that topic of the 3 to 6 months, Paul, like, it's funny because I know some private lenders that I have a private lender's money right now in a 4-unit Airbnb by the beach. And actually that property is under contract. And if it closes, I'll be calling him in the next 5 days to pay him off. And I've had his money for about 1.5 years, and he didn't want his money back. And he goes, let's see here. I wanted to borrow it for 6 months and then refi, because it was a pretty heavy rehab. I needed 6 months. Actually, it's funny. I ended up needing 9, but I didn't know that. And so rehabbed it from office and converted it to essentially hotel zoning. It was already zoned for hotel, but anyway, converted from office to short-term rental. And it was a successful project. But he told me, he goes, if you try to, and it's in the loan documents, but if you try to pay me off inside of 12 months, you are going to need to pay the shortfall in interest that didn't get to accrue. So essentially you're paying me my interest rate. It's an interest only loan. You're paying me my interest rate for 12 months, even if you pay me off in month 6. And so here I am probably approaching.
There is a prepayment penalty.
There is definitely a prepayment penalty. And so, his preference was a 3-year note. And he's a high net worth physician out of South Florida that likes to do private lending, and came by way of just an introduction. So, but what's interesting is, like, you sound like you would prefer to churn your capital a little more. And that's really what I'm getting at here, is like, maybe talk about the notion behind getting a little more, I'm calling it churn, but a little more velocity of capital and getting into more deals. So could you speak to that?
This is a really interesting topic. I'm glad you asked it. So the velocity of money, or the preference as to how quickly someone pays you off from a loan, is very much a function of your goals with your capital, and often a function of the cycle of life you're in. So I'm in my mid 40s, and I didn't start being in this business until I was 37, and not actually into the lending business until I was like in the early 40s. So I'm still very young in the case of, I'm in the growth mode of having a lending fund. So I can earn a lot more the more often I turn money. And if anybody doesn't know, when you're doing hard money, you're paying points, and where the hard money lender is actually making money is on the points, more so than the spread that they're making between their money and the interest that they're charging you. So I'm having to pay interest to my investors, right? So the investors that come to me, they don't want to be active. They want to be passive. And this guy sounds like he's probably older. He has a lot of capital. He's not trying to grow his wealth. He's trying to really preserve his wealth. So that's why he wants the longer term, and he wants a decent return because he wants his money to work for him and beat inflation and whatnot. But his goal is preservation and and like ease of life. Whereas I'm willing to do the work, build the team that it takes to churn money as fast as possible so that I can get a compounding return and make up for the time that I haven't been compounding my money, since this guy's probably been doing it since he was 20 and I haven't been.
And I think that for those that haven't looked at I don't have your model obviously in front of me. We literally just met for this show. It's been a blast. But like, I'm sure by charging points, which is common in hard and private money lending, and getting it
Yep.
out the door, let's say 3 times, 4 times a year instead of
Yep.
once every couple of years, you're hit. I mean, it's easy. I mean, I think the audience can even visualize the return. If you just say you charge 2 or 3 points, a certain one between 1 and 3. I don't know if I'm sure maybe your points vary, maybe they don't, but you start doing that 2, 3, 4 times a year in addition to the interest rate.
Through your interest carry. Yeah.
Yeah. So it starts to quickly exceed, like I see what you're saying, the benefit of the carried interest is going to be like subservient to these points. And like you said, you like repeat people. So you're, as far as like qualifying the entity or the individual, the borrowing entity, that's probably pretty short, pretty quick homework.
It is.
Yeah.
Yeah. I very much believe in betting on the jockey versus betting on the horse. Like, I want them to be riding a good deal in the horse in this situation. So I'm still going to bet that. But what really makes the deal valuable is the person who's operating it. In this case, the jockey, in this example. So I like to find really good jockeys that know how to find deals and just repeat.
Now, I wouldn't be a good host if I didn't ask, on the devil's advocate side, have you had to take any properties back, and what are you doing to insulate your investors in the fund from downside?
Yep, good question. So the one level of insulation is that we're spreading out the investors over a variety of loans, over a variety of markets. So that's you're naturally getting diversification there. Also, our underwriting process, we only lend 50% loan to value. That's a big part of it. But there are still situations that come up where people don't perform. Sometimes life just happens to people. I actually had a really sad case of one of the borrowers that I worked with was actually killed. And so we had to foreclose. Like, there was just like the inherited party that took on her opportunities, just like didn't know, lacked the sophistication to deal with how to deed the property back over to us. They just kind of disappeared on us. So we had to foreclose, but we have the option to foreclose. And so we had to foot the bill for foreclosing it. But, in over 100 properties, that's the one failure that we've had. And that's pretty consistent what I've heard from other peers in the group, that your failure rate's something around the order of 1% to 2%. If you run your business well, because we're doing super conservative loans and super low loan to values. So it's oftentimes, if for some reason the borrower is having trouble, we push back really hard and say, this is your problem to solve. This is not our problem to solve. You're the one that brought it to us. Fix it. And that's usually what it takes. And in the rare instance where they're just simply incapable, or not alive in this case, to solve the problem, then we have the ultimate answer, which is foreclosure.
And in that same vein of remedies, do you look to your borrower to have any additional collateral or cash on hand, or is it more real estate collateral based lending on the subject property?
Good question. In our case, since we do such small loans, and since we do a 50% loan to value, we only use the guarantee. We don't provide a personal guarantee. We don't offer a personal guarantee, or require one. I mean, we just have the collateral of the property itself. Their reputation is so important to them in this space that if they get into the habit of not performing, then they'll never do business, or they'll have a hard time doing business in this space anymore. Because in the land flipping space, it's a very tight community, and it's a very small community in the scheme of things. And their reputation is extremely important to them to be able to do deals, because a lot of these people will band together and do deals together. And when they have a reputation of not performing and they're not paying back their borrower or their lenders, then things come unraveled very quickly.
Mm-hmm. No, I do agree. All right. Just as a hypothetical, what is the typical land flipper that let's say your fund lends to me in Jacksonville? What would I typically be buying and doing with the property? When I say doing, what's your investor typically doing You said ag was popular, so I'm just kind
What's
of
the exit
curious.
strategy? Yeah.
Yeah, I'm curious what like
Yeah.
what your average borrower is like actually doing in these
There's kind of
repositions.
one or two scenarios. Yeah, there's one or two scenarios. One is infill, so that's usually it's already zoned, and it's just a lot that already has utilities to it. It just hasn't been. It's probably the worst lot on a subdivision on a given street. It's the last one to sell, and that's usually the one. The other scenario is recreational land that's kind of out in the middle of nowhere, probably ag, or just out in the county. And usually it has access to water or some sort of like feature where people would want to be out there and just do recreational activities. And then the kind of the third scenario is where it's ag, like true ag, and it's being farmed now, but it's people buy a big plot and then they plat it down into smaller for development. That's the third scenario. We're most careful with that one because we want a very clear exit strategy. If it takes a lot of time involved, it's just not our play.
That makes perfect sense. And I know a group, there's no point in me naming them right now, but they like to be in the outskirts of Jacksonville, and they like to do, I would call them like ranchettes, but they're gonna take down larger tracts of ag or similar. They're gonna break them up into like hobby farm type stuff, where you can kind of feel like John Dutton, but
Perfect.
maybe you're only on, 10 acres. But okay, no, that makes perfect sense. And I do understand why you would
Sure.
tread cautiously on those, because taking down the land, getting it drawn, platted, and if there's any entitlement, is probably going to often exceed the term of your
6 months.
preferred
Yeah.
loan. Yeah. Okay.
Yep.
Well, Paul, kind of kind of transitioning a little bit in where do you want to, looking forward, where do you want to take your fund? What are kind of like on the goal setting side of things? I would imagine your demand is fairly high because I think your product is novel. And novel's good as long as people know
Yeah.
about it. So tell us a little bit about your
Sure.
goals and kind of where you see this going.
Well, right now we have the great product market fit for the marketplace. So we have plenty of demand for borrowers wanting to borrow from us. We are actually very heavily out there marketing to ourselves to raise capital so that we have enough capital to lend on. So like that's where we spend most of our time and energy, and our goals there are around raising capital and fully funding our $10 million fund. And at that point, once we close the fund and have $10 million, we'll probably run it for a year or two before we do a round two and probably reconsider. But right now we are in the very much the point of maintaining operational excellence with our lending practices and raising capital.
Excellent. So let's say I want to invest in your fund. What would be, and I am, but let's just say hypothetically, I am accredited and I want to know more. Like, how much do I have to put in? When do I get it back? All the usual questions Sarah might have for you. Can you speak to that?
Sure. It's a $10 million fund, and it's for accredited investors, and our preferred return is 12%. And then anything that we make above that, we split with the LPs 50-50. So we're targeting a 15% return for investors, and it's a minimum investment of 100,000, and it's a 1-year commitment. At the end of the 1 year, you can decide to continue rolling the funds or continue the investment if you'd like. And we do quarterly payments of the 12% or whatever our current return is based on our performance.
Well, that was clear as can be. So a 12% pref with the quarterly distributions, and you split there above. That's with a $100,000 minimum for accredited investors. And we already know what you're lending on because we dove into that. All right. Very cool, Paul. That was good. You know your stuff because you talked through it right away. All right. Well, we already did a deal breakdown. I think we did enough of like a hypothetical deal. One thing I do like to ask is, you've developed quite a real estate mind. You've been on the block. You've been obviously on some big shows, and I've really enjoyed this conversation. Do you have any resources you'd like to share with the audience? I kind of call it the call to play, we kind of this coaching theme with Yield Coach, but impactful real estate or personal development books. Obviously you transitioned from a correlated industry, engineering is helpful for real estate, but it's, you've picked up a whole lot. Now you're running private lending funds. So resources that meant a lot to you and took you a long ways.
Well, you have to do the personal improvement for yourself. Like, you are the limiting factor of your performance. And so everything about what you think you need really comes down to what you know how to do. And a lot of the things that you're thinking about right now that you have figured out, that you think you have figured out, are probably what's holding you back. Like, so you're creating self-sabotaging behaviors and don't even realize it. And so I'm really big on a couple of fundamental books that help with this. And it's one of them is The Big Leap, and that's by Gay Hendricks. That's where I got this idea of the zone of genius. That was the term he coined. And then the most recent book that I found on this that I really like is 10X is Easier Than 2X, by Sullivan. Anything written by him, I'm usually reading, and he's the guy who wrote the book Who Not How, and he has a ghostwriter that helps him write these things, and they're just pumping out books these days, and they're good. They're really good. So the most recent book that I've read that really made a difference was 10X is Easier Than 2X.
Awesome. Very good. What do you like to do for fun when you're not out there raising capital and lending on land?
I like to cook. My kids are 15 and 12 as they stand now, and so we like to travel with them. We just got back from a trip in the Ozarks where we went to the pool during the summer. And I really like other cultures and understanding, like learning little bits of the language. Not that I'm actually fluent in any other languages, but I like to go to, say, Italy and go to the grocery store and like practice ordering, your ingredients there at the local grocery store, and getting a sense of what it's like to live in another country by just living like they do locally versus just going to all the tourist traps.
That sounds like fun. We did Costa Rica this past fall, and my wife was on Duolingo for like a year. And we get down there. I'm like, babe, this is your time to shine. I don't even want to admit it. I actually got all the way up to intermediate Spanish at Florida State. God bless my Seminoles, but I do not know Spanish. And that was like 20 years ago. So, but it's just fun being in a new culture. It completely changes the paradigm from which you view the world. And I don't know about you, depending on where you travel, you go to places like Costa Rica, and it gives you I'll speak for myself, a very deep appreciation for all that we have. It's a beautiful country in Costa Rica. We have so much opportunity, so much opportunity. And it made me fill with gratitude. And so when I say that, it's not to disparage any other country. I love the experience and the adventure. I always come back with deep gratitude for what I do and where I live.
Agreed.
All right.
Totally agree.
Paul, where can people find you? Let's say they want to invest in your fund, follow you on social media, all the fun places you are. Where can people connect with Paul Thompson?
The best place to find me is my website, pauldavidthompson.com. The way all those names will be spelled, I'm sure you'll drop it in the show notes, and you can find my fund at One Call Capital. I'll give you the link so that you can add it to the show notes. And if you're interested, if you're a credit investor, you can book a time on my schedule to just talk shop. Even if you're not accredited, I'd love to talk to you about your strategies, because there's always two people in a real estate transaction, and there's no doubt we'll be doing business together.
Wonderful. Well, Paul Thompson, everybody, this has been a lot of fun, and it was a unique topic. I will say it's an underserved market. I wish you definitely the best in this loan product. I think I know there's not enough of it, because I've had to buy products that you would lend on, and I bought them cash, and I probably would have used you if I knew about it. So wonderful.
Yep.
All right, everybody.
Yep.
It's been a lot of fun chatting with Paul today. We're going to bring this show home. Make sure you give us a follow, a rate, a review, share this with a friend, especially if you think they might want to invest with Paul and his fund as it's growing up to $10 million. And those reviews make a huge difference for us. So be sure to do that so we can get better and better content to you. If you're into the socials, we are on Insta and Facebook and YouTube as Yield Coach. We frequently post opportunities, bonus content, and inside looks into what we're doing. But for now, that's a wrap on this show. I'm your coach, Ian Brown, signing off and reminding everybody to lace up and leave it all on the field. Yield Coach out.